Oh, that's new. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Masterclass on creating a high-performance sales culture, sponsored by the team at Spiff. And today, before we jump into it, we actually have two first-time panelists, which is wild considering their backgrounds. But Matt and Stan, welcome, and thank you for your time today. We do have a tradition on Modern Sales Pros. We love to learn a little bit more about our panelists before we actually jump in to talk about all the amazing content. So Matt, with us entering the next normal, where are you excited to go on vacation when you finally take the proper vacation?
That's an amazing question. I'm currently in the process of buying a rental property in Maui. So that will 100% be my first one. Super excited to get on a beach and not have to worry about things. But yeah, no, super excited to kind of get away and take an actual vacation that's not in my living room.
It's like, yeah, no, I put the fence up around the couch and shut it down.
Totally.
Love it. And Stan, how about you? Where are you excited? Where's the first vacation going to be?
Well, I just got denied by Matt to stay at his place for free. So it looks like I've got to somewhere else.
This guy is tough to work for.
But yeah, California, that's where I'll be with my family in June. Super excited to head out and be by the beach.
Awesome. And are you Southern California, I'm assuming, because you said beach?
Oceanside. Yep.
Very nice. It's great. Oh,
yeah, looking forward to it.
That'll be great. Two amazing beach places. I feel like that's an important part of high performance for just humans in general. Water, beach, tropical dreams. Lots of sun. I love it. Well, folks, stick around for the travel tips. We'll also talk about building a high performance sales culture here. And we're going to jump into it because we've got a lot of programming to cover here today. But for those of you who aren't aware, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are individuals that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members where they can answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. We do that through bringing together great panelists like Matt and Stan. We have a very robust online forum. And then once we're able to, we will also get back to doing in-person events, which are a great way to meet some folks, learn some new stuff, and also have a good time, which I know everybody's really looking forward to. Everything that we do for our community members is free. And for those of you who aren't members, you'll be invited to join afterwards. But as I mentioned at the beginning, today's content wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of the team at Spiff. I'm going to hand it off to Matt to say a few words about Spiff. Matt.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, so Spiff is a commissions management platform. We help companies automate their commissions, give reps total transparency in regards to where they are against their goals, how much commissions they're going to be receiving. So we're really driving trust between finance and ops and sales in a very automated and transparent way.
Awesome. And Spiff has been, I think, a 4 or 5 time sponsor of Modern Sales Pros, huge advocate, and always excited to bring great panelists on from great organizations. But with that, let's give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. First, I'm going to hand it off to Stan to introduce himself. Stan.
Thanks, Rich. Yep. So Stan James, I am VP of Sales at Spiff. Been at Spiff for a little over a year now. I've actually been in the tech space for a little over 20 years as both an individual contributor and as well as a leader, having worked with market leaders like Siebel Systems, Omniture, now Adobe, Zant, amongst others that are doing a really good job in the market. So really excited to be at Spiff. I actually, something unique in this role for me is I started out as a consultant, and because of the opportunity and the problem they were solving in market, that allowed me the opportunity to work with Matt and really drive value to the market. So looking forward to the conversation. Thanks, Rich.
And I'm Matt Marshall. I've been in tech for longer than I care to admit. My first job was at a company here in San Francisco called Embarcadero Technologies. From there, I was at a company called Success Factors. I was there super early and saw it all the way through. After that, I went to Citrix down in Santa Barbara on the GoToMeeting side of the house. And from there, before Spiff, I was at a company called Iterable for a little over 4 years. saw super growth and have been at Spiff now for almost come up a year. And the reason I was so excited to join was just, I think we're solving a problem that no one's really solved well. And I think that this market is really kind of ripe for disruption. And the way that our solution is built, it's really built for scale. So that's really what drew me in and got me super excited.
Oh, this is great. And we have some serious octane in both of our panelists here today. So folks, please do take advantage of the time that we have with them. Before we jump into our content here today, just 2 housekeeping notes. Please do use the question and answer panel for any questions that you have, and that will allow you to upvote and respond to others' questions. It also helps me as the moderator make sure I'm feeding questions to the best person to answer it. Also, if you ask a great question, Matt or Stan may want to follow up with you afterwards and dive in a little bit deeper. And before anybody asks, the recording will be made available afterwards, usually about 24 hours after this shows up on the MSP YouTube channel. Also show up on our post-event page with all of the great content summarized for you. But with that, Matt, Stan, you ready? Should we jump into it? You feeling it?
Let's do it. Jump in.
Excellent. All right, folks. So today we're going to be talking about a few different topics related to creating and sustaining a high-performance sales culture. First, we're going to talk about organizational philosophy towards comp. We're going to dive into setting goals and how to handle both over and under performance. We're going to talk going kind of beyond just the monetary rewards, but thinking about things like maybe it is Matt actually letting us stay at his Maui house, a non-monetary form of compensation. And then finally, if we have time, we're going to bring it home with the role of technology in managing performance and setting goals. So with that, Stan, let's get started with you here. When you think about, having an organizational philosophy towards sales comp, why is that important for organizations?
Well, the most important thing is, in my opinion, sales comp has to be aligned to your corporate objectives. When we think about at least what is comprised of a great comp plan, I think it has to be a mixture of simplicity. It needs to be transparent, certainly fair, so that all have an opportunity to hit metrics. And then when it's done right, I think the outcome is you obviously hit your goals. But I also think if done right, you end up creating a competitive advantage in market, because that could be your greatest asset. And then I also think that you create a destination of sorts for other future, as your company grows, it becomes this destination of sorts where salespeople flock to. And I think all those factor into having those components into a general comp plan.
And I think that's an overlooked part. Stan, can you chime in a little bit more about aligning towards some of the corporate goals as well? I think sometimes we think about sales comp in a vacuum.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a very common practice. Sometimes you get together as leaders, and I'm saying that from an executive perspective, where you kind of, all right, we have this number, how are we going to go do it? Let's create this plan that we think gets you to that point. But obviously there's a lot more that goes into it. And I think alignment with executives, what's the purpose of the objectives? I mean, outside of revenue, there are other things that lead to revenue that have to be considered. There's future product that's going to be rolled out. There are changes that are going to happen to an organization. And frankly, if you're growing like Spiff is, you become a new company every quarter, every 6 months, and you need to make sure the plan accounts for that kind of growth as well. So there are a lot of factors that go into that, in my opinion, and part of that is collaboration. It's not just a sales leader's plan; it's a company plan, and driving to that end state is really important to collaborate amongst the organization to make sure there's alignment across all departments.
Well, it feels like that. I mean, alignment, every time we talk about comp, there's a big piece that's alignment driven. And Matt, I know you've had experience of this, like you said, at some really, really high growth companies. How do you drive some of that alignment, and how do you actually kind of spread an organizational philosophy?
It's a great question. I think it really all starts with having like a mission statement for the company, but then, from a sales perspective, having one for sales. And the mission statement that I like to drive is, we want to be the best sales team in SaaS. Now, that's broad, but it also gives you an opportunity to continuously improve, continuously excel. To Stan's point on the alignment thing, I really do believe that is essential. And not only just alignment, but having transparency into kind of how everything rolls up from all the way down to BDRs, all the way up to me and then our CEO and our company in general. One of the things that Spiff does on the alignment piece is that everyone in the company receives a small percentage of commissions across the company. Now, I've seen that in the past, but people have really stumbled on it. It's hard to kind of drive people that way. But at Spiff, using our solution, but giving, not a plug, giving people visibility and transparency into the ultimate goals really helps drive alignment across the company. And then when you think about alignment, you think about what kind of behaviors are we after, what kind of business objectives are important when it comes to, multi-year deals, cash up front, all of those sorts of things tie into those goals. But I think that the key is having alignment, but also having transparency on, what are the goals, what feeds into them, but why do we have these goals? I think is the most important people to get people to buy in, so to speak.
Well, I think there's an interesting point that you said kind of at the beginning where you said, hey, look, we're building the best SaaS organization in the world. How does that actually help drive alignment? Because I think we've had a lot of conversations about this before, but really coming out there and saying, no, this is what we're going to do. How does that then trickle down into driving alignment?
I think on the revenue side, to shoot high, right? Like I said, you always have room to move up, but you can also really focus on where do we need to improve? How do we get better at that? But then also, like, what behaviors can we incent to drive to the corporate goals? How do we improve upon those? How do we enable people on those and, across the board? So for me, wanting to be the best SaaS sales team in SaaS really drives, enablement. It drives higher performance, and there's always room to improve. And I think, like, from a sales perspective, understanding where you can improve and enabling on it, I think is super important when you're scaling and growing a company, because you're never going to be perfect all the time, right? And there's always room to kind of maneuver. But if you have that kind of overarching goal, people understand, that is the goal. Now, you could argue best SaaS team in SaaS, or sales team in SaaS, is a huge statement, but it also gives you belief to go after it and really try to be that kind of organization.
Stan, I love your perspective on this too, Stan. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, I think there was something that Matt said that triggered the why statement. And in my mind, is what is the purpose of the metrics or the why behind that, what we're doing from a comp plan perspective. And we're going to talk about a lot of topics, but the why behind that matters, and getting reps, teams on board to the why is going to be really important into everything that we do around sales. And so I just, when he was stating that as a factor, I couldn't help think about where in my experience in the past, when I have failed to explain the why, it's a struggle. And sometimes I just naturally forget and don't explain it. But when I do explain the why, and sometimes that's getting ahead of it, like something's coming, a new technology or a new product or a new part of the plan, and getting buy-in and explaining the why, I think is super important. So the shock factor, which sometimes happens, is avoided. And you want to avoid the downtime and the water cooler where you can, and all that's going to naturally happen. But I think just collaboration and communication is super important, and the why is the drive.
I think I love so much of what those points that we all just made. I think coming back to Matt, that point of like what Stan was saying, alignment and transparency, but coming out there and saying, hey, look, we want to be the best X in the world. We want to be the best SaaS team. We want to be the best SEs. And then you start to say, okay, well, what does that look like?
Right.
And then you build first principles around that, which makes some of these other conversations, I don't want to say easier, but it seems like it gives you an organizational framework where you can say, look, this is how we run things here. This is why we run things this way. And that's how your comp plan lines up to that.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. It gives you a North Star, and to Stan's point on the why, I think the thing that it does is it really reminds you to talk about the why. Like when we rolled out comp plans this year, I forget what we were talking about. And I literally looked at Stan, I'm like, well, they know that. And he goes, do they? So it just reminds you to like all of the whys, everything ties into that kind of overall arching statement.
I think that there's a lot, there's probably a whole conversation just around the philosophy, but I want to actually go forward a little bit here and chat more about goal setting. So transparency, totally understand all of that. Let's talk a little bit more about what to do with both under and over performance. And Stan, let's start with you here, because I know you've got some experience specifically around goal setting. But how do you handle both over and under performance, or how have you seen it handled in the past?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty long discussion, actually, because I think every team, every rep, every leader is in a different setting with different circumstances that they're working through. But I think that, ultimately, I think the mistake I made very early on as a leader is, in many ways, I kind of treated all reps the same, thinking that, hey, we're in a good system, we've got great process, we've got great leadership. I was new, so I wouldn't count myself into that bucket. I was great in the making. But I do think that not all reps have the same set of needs, and they're in different buckets, so to speak, in terms of being able to acclimate or hit their revenue targets. So from my experience, just having gone through that myself as an individual contributor and as a leader, the one thing that I've always taken away from that experience and always trying to practice my craft and get better is to really set clear expectations really early, because whether you're overperforming or underperforming, I do think that there is a real need to have expectations early. And that's even from the hiring process. This is what the job looks like. This is what good looks like. And then I think the transparency in being able to have those metrics be able to be shown, so that, when you're actually in the data, being able to see where those challenges are. Because again, not all reps are having challenges in the same area. Some might have top of funnel challenges. Some might have closing challenges, and being able to get things over the finish line. And I think leveraging the data and hitting it early to know those signs, to be able to help them and coach them to be successful. Because as far as I am concerned, my single focus and primary job is to help them be successful and put money into their pocket as sales professionals. And by leveraging, and I'm sure we'll have more discussion on technology and other things that will help us draw transparency into that, it's really important.
I think that the data, the importance of the data and expectation setting can't be understated. But Stan, I want to call out one point you said there. Even in the hiring process, right? You were saying, hey, you set expectations. This is what great looks like. So much of that, I think, is missed in a lot of organizations, where they just, Matt, to your point, oh, we'll hire some sellers. They'll figure it out. They understand why. But really having that conversation allows you to get the right people in the organization. Is that kind of how the right way to think about it there, Stan?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's more to it as well in terms of, the hiring process and what you're looking for. But generally, I think it's important to let the reps understand, because there is a certain sales velocity you're looking for. If you're selling enterprise, you're probably not going to hire someone that has had SMB experience. And if you have an SMB sales velocity, you're probably not going to hire enterprise people. And so I think it's super important to have alignment even early on at that stage from a hiring perspective, because you want to bring the right people on the bus that can be successful in what you're looking to do, going back to kind of the vision and the mission of the company and the culture that we're trying to drive to. And I think all that is critical up earlier on in the discussions.
Oh, this is great. And we got a question coming in, Matt. I'll tee you up for this, and then I'd also love your perspective on under and over performance. But really, how do you create, or what is it? What about creating a culture such that your competitors are maybe afraid once they know you're in a deal? Like any thoughts on that? Is that a good goal to shoot for? Should we be thinking about things differently?
Absolutely. So when I was in a previous life, we had obviously a major competitor. We were both kind of disrupting the market. And, one of the things that I would tell the sales team was, our competitor would constantly take the low road, right? They'd lie. They would tell things that just weren't true. On one sales call, I had heard that I had been fired, which is kind of comical when I was on the call. And so I really drove like, the message to the sales team was, look, we're in a really competitive market. Us and this other company are in total like leapfrog mode of like, well, we have this feature, and we go, oh, all right, hold on, we have that feature, but now we have this, right? And just constantly outdoing each other from a product standpoint. And the one thing that we drove really hard on the leadership team was, the one thing that we can control is us. So like, let's give customers the best sales experience they've ever had. And because of that, I would get emails from customers that would just out of the blue email me and say, hey, Matt, like I was dealing with such and such salesperson. We went with your competitor because they had this feature or whatever that was really important to us. But I wanted you to know that that was the best sales process I've ever been through. And if I ever am in the market again, I'm coming directly to you guys. And I think like just kind of giving people that experience sets you apart. It really does. And it made a big difference in our ability to kind of compete with that other competitor when we went head to head, and it was head to head every day. So like I really drove a high class kind of white glove sales process that wasn't, you know, hey, how you doing? It was more like, tell me about your problems. How can we solve them? And if we can't, let's have an honest conversation about how we can't, but other solutions we might be able to, or problems we might be able to solve.
That's such a great angle and such a great story here. And the other part I would add to what Matt was saying is like, look, we're not in the early days of SaaS anymore. I can find out everything about Spiff or any company out there from Glassdoor, G2 Crowd, Capterra. I can't sales my way out of a bad product like I used to be able to 5 or 10 years ago. So to Matt's point, part of creating that culture is really creating this amazing experience, whether or not they go with your solution, and being very honest and disqualifying when appropriate as well.
Right. Everybody knows the tricks.
The best take on this one is if you're not taking the opportunity to do a win analysis, and equally as hopefully you're doing on a loss analysis, there are a lot of great elements of that you're pulling from customers and prospects alike, where you're getting that kind of information. What's interesting, when I do win reviews, I can tell you the sales execution comes up almost every time. And there's a big factor that goes into great sales execution, because at the end of the day, you know, if you're, you know, we at Spiff don't believe we believe that the customers are already informed coming to the table, but we also believe that they are needing to make the best fit and decisions for them. And so our job is to give them what value Spiff, in our case, brings to the table, and let them make it a call. And hopefully it comes our way, but sometimes it doesn't. So again, we do a lot of win and loss analysis in our process to learn how we can be improving in our processes.
There's so much there. There's a whole conversation about how to deal with competitors as well. Before we move forward here, though, Matt, I do want to get your perspective on kind of top and bottom performers, not just from how you manage them from a compensation standpoint, but really like culturally, how do you handle top and bottom performers, top of band, bottom band, as it were?
Yeah. So on the top end of that equation, you know, from a comp perspective, I really try to put like big, audacious comp goals out there, knowing that, you know, your top 10% is only really going to hit them. But, you know, what I try to do by doing that is, if you can get, you know, 3 or 4 of your top performers just blowing out their numbers and not slowing down, right? It kind of lifts the performance of everyone else, because they want to strive to be there, or at least not get totally left behind. So there's just a mentality of it's possible, right? Like I could go make that bonus. It's possible because that person's doing it. So it kind of lifts the energy and urgency across the whole sales team. On the bottom end, I think if you have a large majority of people that are under goal or underperforming, I think you got to look at your quotas in general to make sure those are aligned. But, you know, on the low end of underperformance, you know, I think everybody deserves the right to, you know, be helped and have those conversations to know where they stand. Like to me, I think that, you know, if a rep is underperforming, but doing everything they can possibly do to try to be successful, I'm willing to work with them until we can figure it out. You know, it could be a skill, it could be that they could be in the wrong position in a sales team. But I think, you know, ultimately, you know, sometimes you have to have hard conversations. But I think, you know, what I have found over the years is the top drive everybody higher, but there's also a few that are on the lower side that will drag people down. So I think you have to, from a cultural perspective, understand where you kind of draw the line and hold that line pretty strongly.
Well, and I think there's a lot there. And one of the challenges that you hear, I think average attainment, you know, across everybody, with the last survey we did with Spiff was like average rep attainment was what, 40%?
Yeah.
or something like that. Like this isn't baseball. Like that's not a winning culture.
No.
And you contend as well with and Matt, I know you've got perspective on this, but the CEO who's oh cool, we got a bigger number, let's just double quota. How do you manage that relationship between, let's call it the revenue organization, and maybe finance, or a CEO that's applying pressure to do something unnatural?
So yeah, you and I have talked about this many times. So I like when I'm in those meetings with the board or, you know, the exec team, like my talk track around that is like, look, like I understand we need to grow and I understand we want to grow really fast, but I just need to be able to see a path to that number. Understanding that throughout the year, there's going to be trees falling in the road, sinkholes are going to open up, but I just need to be able to see a path. And I judge that path on how fast can we hire people? How fast can they ramp? How fast is our pipeline building? Does it correlate with the numbers that we're after? And if it isn't, I just have honest conversations with people. And, you know, I want to make sure that expectations are set right. I don't think numbers should be easy, but, you know, I've been in a situation before where the numbers were extremely high. We were tripling revenue quarter over quarter, and we still felt like losers because we were missing the number. So I think if the danger of setting numbers that are not achievable is you could destroy your culture, because everyone feels like they're failing, even when they're like doubling revenue or whatever. So I think that those conversations as a revenue leader, you have to be comfortable having, because, you know, sometimes the growth trajectory that people want, it just doesn't align with what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's actually back to one of the first things that you mentioned around a culture of transparency and being honest and having a first principle. If you want to build a, what was the words that you used? You want to build the best SaaS selling organization. That's an organization that's consistently at or above quota.
Correct.
That's not an organization that's consistently at 40-ish%, or maybe somebody makes some money one quarter. So, and I imagine that data also plays an important role in that, right?
Absolutely.
All those metrics that you mentioned there.
Absolutely. And, you know, as we thought about this year, like Stan and I just poured through a bunch of data just to ensure, like, is this number real? Can we actually do it? Is it going to be easy? No. But can we get to it? And the answer was yes.
I love it. And Matt and Stan, I'm going to read this question, and then Stan, I actually want to start with you on this. So we've talked about kind of under and over performance here. Commissions obviously being one important part of it, but what else have you seen, either tools or strategies, to help get those maybe C, D, not your best performers, get them closer to the middle? What are some things that you could recommend? And this is a question from Mohit here. But Stan, let's start with you. Tips or tricks to kind of get people from maybe underperformance to at least acceptable performance.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a broken record on this, but I think you still need to know what good is, so that you know how to help these underperformers. So once you have your benchmark, from that perspective, you can lean into the areas where the improvement needs to be. And again, I've seen reps, be across the spectrum. And so I think one of the things that Matt's done a really good job at Spiff is he's brought in some help in terms of coaching. A frontline manager, in my estimation, has the most impact on the numbers in the business, and getting leaders acclimated to the sales methodology, or getting leaders acclimated to the motion in general, and then having that trickle to the reps, and getting the reps involved in a constant coaching motion, whether it's sales enablement, whether it's an outsource help. I can tell you just from our group and what I've seen at other companies I've been at, those companies that invest in their people see the best outcome, because they're not most sales organizations underestimate the power of this kind of coaching or training or investment into their people, which is really important. In fact, it's interesting. I read this article, and I'm just looking over to my right here. I think the article was 91%. See, 91% of millennials have career progression and improvement as their top priority. It's a different world out there. Matt and I have been in the business for a long time, and there's a different need. And so, I'm maybe not giving a lot of specifics in terms of, how to handle underperformers, but I think first and foremost, we got to know what good is. And then at each level of where that rep is, being able to help them and give them that individual coaching is pretty important. But I'll let Matt provide some of his anecdotes and feedback on that as well.
Yeah, I think that part of it, living in this world that we're now living in, that's kind of figuring itself out of whatever is going to be is going to be. I just don't, I think that people are stressed, and I don't think, I think part of helping people that are underperforming is trying to understand what is going on in their life, right? Like, is there something preventing them from underperforming? Because, as we all have been remote and isolated and all these other things for like the last year and a half, there could be things going on that no one's aware of anymore because we're not in offices. We're not, having that kind of face-to-face connection. So one, I think getting understanding of kind of what may be happening in their life, I think is super important. And to Stan's point, you got to spend time coaching people. You got to give people a chance versus just like, bottom 10%. Like those, I think those days are over. And I think that, just getting a handle on the people themselves is super important, and it's super critical because it ultimately shows that you care. Over the years, I think that, the one thing that I've learned over all these years is if you boil it all down, there are two types of revenue leaders in the world. There are ones that lead numbers first and people second, and then there's vice versa. And like I've been always mentored and taught on the people first. And, I believe that if you take care of your people, in theory, the numbers should take care of themselves. Now, there's obviously much more to it than that statement. But I think, in this day and age of coaching, you really need to know someone for them to be receptive.
I think there is a lot there. The point, I mean, there's so much, but it comes back to a lot of the things that we said at the outset of why, not just why your organization is doing what it's doing, but why the person. I mean, you could do there's a lot of things that you could do that are probably more fulfilling day in and day out than sales. Yeah. The second part, and Stan, you mentioned this, but I think it's incredibly important, is your frontline sales managers. Oftentimes they got to that role because their boss got fired. Yeah. Oftentimes they haven't had any training, let alone in people management, but coaching in particular is a huge gap. We see that time and time again in conversations in modern sales pros, in surveys that we've done. Your frontline managers have outsized impact, and they think they're super AEs or super SDRs, not coaches. Mm-hmm. And that mindset, I think, is incredibly important to, you're going to coach your coaches on how to coach. And that helps move that bottom performing chump up or out, versus just being, Matt, to your point, like, cool, we'll do it the old Microsoft way, bottom 10%, hit the bricks, see you later. Like, that doesn't really work anymore, especially in a high growth SaaS business in all instances.
Agreed.
A different, just I think topic and a question that came in, and I don't know if I answered it adequately, but when ultimately sales drives revenue, and you have goals and targets you need to hit. And that's why, I was focusing in understanding kind of what that benchmarker was, so that then you can look and peel back the onion a little bit and see where that coaching needs to happen. So for example, oftentimes if the metrics are in place, you can kind of see if it's a top of funnel issue. And sometimes, what Matt was leading with empathy is something that, he does really well, that I've, tried to leverage more in just my style in general, because what happens is helping reps understand you care and helping them feel like they're winning. I think creating a winning culture is really important. This goes back to if 40% of your people are not hitting numbers, that ends up being a little challenged when it comes to hitting certain metrics and numbers. But helping reps feel like they're winning by going back and say, hey, maybe when we're helping underperforming reps, create a plan that you create a weekly or maybe even a monthly objective where it's like, this week or this day, we're going to do X amount of calls, because we know what good is, and we're just going to kind of use those activities. And if we end up doing that day, that's a win. And helping reps feel like they're accomplishing something so that they can get their mojo back, so to speak, because ultimately there are metrics that lead to revenue. And those are the things oftentimes I have focused on in my past and currently, so that I can help each individual become successful. Because sometimes it's just getting that momentum and getting that rhythm and getting those at-bats. And we tend to find that revenue oftentimes follows. So it's sometimes just getting a little bit more granular on where that need is, coaching them on how to accelerate it and manage through it.
I think there's a lot here for us to unpack, and we're going to come back to some of these coaching concepts because it's an important part of the high performance sales culture. But what else can you do? And Stan, let's start with you here on the non-monetary front, right? We spent a bunch of time talking about setting up comp plans and using data and all of that. You mentioned leading with empathy, but what are some other things that you can do or you've seen that are consistent across high performance sales cultures that aren't monetary or comp plan related?
It's funny. The first thing I thought of, Rich, when we first originally thought of the topic here, is ping pong and snacks and sodas and machines that really, drive.
Those were the days.
Great compensations. One of these days, I'll maybe on another session, I'll share my ping pong story. But generally, those really don't drive the kind of outcome that we're looking for. As great as they are, the workforce is looking for something a little bit different. They're trying to find meaning in their careers. And frankly, I think the biggest thing we can do as an organization and as leaders is give them a path to success, developing some kind of a career path that allows them to know what their journey could be if they do well in their role. I think part of that is promoting within, being able to actually show that. I've done that at Spiff. We've done that at other places in our careers. But being able to show them a path to success, I think, is super important. And making sure you explain that path in very clear and transparent ways is something that's top of mind.
I think there's this great, Matt, what else have you seen in sort of this non-monetary area to really create and sustain high performance in the sales team?
Just everything Stan said.
+1, there it is.
No, I think, to me, like, I've always found the most valuable things are things that create memories, right? And some of them are cliche, like there's president's clubs, there's all those things, but it's like the ones that create memories. Like when I think back over time at my various stops, like there are definitely memories around performance, around seeing someone's face when they get rewarded something monetary or not. I just think it's all around creating memories. That's where you kind of create that bond and kind of, for lack of better words, like loyalty and to the company and how meaningful those things are. Because I think like it's the relationships that you build inside of a company that's growing really fast that can last forever. And I think the memories do too.
And that also makes it easier to go through some of the bumpy times, right? You get a good relationship, and
for sure.
I remember this moment. I can derive some warmth from that. It's not all bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think the wins comment is spot on. If you think about it, what we're looking for is we're looking to be recognized, right?
Yeah.
We're looking to have an opportunity to, stand up in front of our peers, and I don't know if it's an employee of the month, employee of the quarter, a team peer award, whatever it is. It's being able to be recognized, and there's really not a monetary component to it, really, if you think about it. And that's the most probably beneficial momentum builder that you could have. I remember back at Adobe, one of the most memorable experiences I had was a non-monetary element, which was being recognized in front of thousands of people. And I wasn't getting an award. It was just a customer that was satisfied with the experience they had with Omniture. And having had that recognition meant more to me than any other award that I've ever received. And I think having those opportunities and actually creating those opportunities for the team is important. And I think another thing that could be beneficial is also allowing reps that are looking for that career path to be seen amongst their peers and also leaders in action, whether it's they have interest in changing the way. For example, we have an initiative right now where we're making the Spiff the best instance of Spiff in the market, meaning very tailored towards our team. And we have a rep that's leading the charge in making that instance of Spiff tailored to their needs. And that's something that they're getting recognized, and they're finding value in that, and that it kind of drives to the culture that we're looking to drive.
I think it's funny you mentioned that story about back at Omniture, right? And I'm sure if I asked you like exactly how much did you make on that deal, you might not remember, but you remember being on stage getting the shout out there in front of thousands of
That's
people.
how much I made right there on that deal. It ended up being a partner deal.
Right, so you do it, but I think that it goes to show you, right? Especially the emergent generation, right? There's way more to a salesperson now than there's ever been. It's more than a quota. It's more than a paycheck. You need to understand and have them bought off on why they need to be grown. They need care and feeding. It's not like back 15 years ago. It's how they're coin operated. Just give them
absolutely.
They'll figure it out. And we got a bunch of questions in here. We're going to hold those until we get through our next point, because I think we'll start to address some there. Our last thing that I know we wanted to hit on here was really technology, the role of technology and data in both performance management and in goal setting. Stan, let's start with you on this. How can technology make this process easier, more transparent, whatever?
Yeah, to me, the tech is all about execution. Once you have a clear understanding of your goals and your mission and your vision as an organization, it's then putting that to work through technology. And it helps with the transparency, it helps with the execution, it helps you know if you're on task, if you're seeing red flags, you have the alerts and the capabilities to be able to address those before they become challenges. It also allows you to derive or gamify, so that we're, as salespeople, we're all competitive and we all want to be the number one of something, and technology helps us to be able to provide that kind of ranking component that keeps people familiar and ever present in terms of where everyone is at any given time. If optimized well, it could be a huge value add and maybe even a competitive edge. If it's not optimized well, it becomes a thing. In fact, I was on a call with a prospect the other day, and when we were talking about our value proposition, the way that they were initially thinking about it was, it's another thing that I have to, present to my team. And, getting them beyond that was no small undertaking, but we were able to overcome it and provide a value kind of presentation, which made sense. But, it's avoid the thing concept and be value add and optimize to your team to allow them to execute and just crush their goals. Because it's really goes back to enabling them. If we're using something that's not allowing them to do their job better, to be more efficient and put money in their pocket, what's the why behind it? We go back to the why.
I think Matt, you got a great point on this too, right? It all comes back to the outcome or the why.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, the kind of rubber meets the road. So I think once you figure out your goals and the whys, you can now then use technology to kind of train and to Stan's point, notify people on the KPIs and everything. But to me, at a company of our size growing like we are, to me, enablement is the most important thing. You've got to ensure you're enabling people to go out and sell your solution in a market that they haven't been in before. The days of okay, Rich, Stan's your buddy, go listen to some phone calls and watch a few demos, and then you're gonna do great. Those days are they're not, people still do it, but it's just so ineffective. And I think ensuring that people have the right enablement, the right tools that enable them to be successful in regards to your tech stack, it also drives the culture. It also drives performance in ways that I think that we don't really think about, right? To have the right tech stack to enable people to go out and sell, I think is super important. And some people can go way overboard with that stuff and actually convolute their whole sales process. So I think choosing tools wisely is also really important.
I think, and there's kind of a meta point there that Matt made that I want to call out. You could buy every tool under the sun and automate the heck out of a really, really broken compensation plan, sales process, discovery, and that's no good. You're almost better served in a lot of instances to do it on the back of a napkin, figure out what that process should be, and figure out the tools that are going to help you get there and the data that will help you do it. And folks, we've got a couple questions in the Q&A panel. We've got a couple in the chat panel. Please do go ahead and keep putting those in there. We've got Matt and Stan here for about another 10 minutes or so. I'm going to fold these two together. So Jessica asks a question around coaching, right? Do you recommend formal coaching? Do you recommend informal coaching? How should we think about coaching? And then Brandon's got a follow on to that, which is how are you thinking about coaching at Spiff? So both of these were kind of on those points around coaching. How do you think about it? How do you set your teams up for success? And Matt, let's start with you on this point, and then Stan, certainly you can hop in here.
I think for new managers, having a template is super helpful, because to Stan's point and your point earlier, Rich, when you get promoted into a first line manager, you are where things live and die, but you're also you're almost like the forgotten hero. So I think having some kind of guide is important. I think, when you have experience, I think a lot of it has to do with your style and what you're comfortable with in regards to having a template and a talk track. I don't have a template for myself, but I've also, I'm older than I care to admit. So I know how to have these conversations, and, even to this day, like having hard conversations is not easy for me. So for those conversations, I'll definitely get prepared and kind of have a talk track. But in regards just to one-on-one training, I think for new managers, it is important because 9 times out of 10, they're not going to have a clue on how to do those things. And, most of the time they will be trying to emulate someone that they've been managed for before. And it's important for them to realize, just be yourself. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Because people, I think getting promoted from a rep to a manager is actually one of the hardest promotions there is, because yesterday you're their peers and today you're their boss. So it changes dynamics drastically in a very short amount of time. So, you have to remember to be authentic and be yourself, but you also kind of need some guidance in the beginning.
I think the other part I would add to that, just to put a finishing touch on what Matt said, is there's a generation of folks that learned SaaS selling from people that sold on-premise software. Correct. And those are the folks that are the era of your first-time directors or your first-time managers or your first-time VPs. There's a lot of bad habits. There's a lot of bad habits that you can pull from on-premise software selling into SaaS. So Matt, I love that point. The other thing I would add on to that as well is, having an idea, back to Stan's point, of what excellent looks like, what good looks like, what great looks like, and then building a coaching plan on an individual basis for your managers on, okay, Stan, you're great at this, but you come across as really stiff in your team meetings. Here's what we're going to work on. Or Matt, you know what? You actually push it too far when you're depositioning or you're training your team to deposition competitors. You got to rein it back like this. Like, that's an important role in the development, and that's what the leader or enablement or coaching should be doing here.
What's interesting, Rich, is the Stan stiff was actually a conversation him and I had a couple of days ago. Kidding. Just kidding. Gotta have some fun.
This is why he doesn't get to go to the Maui house, right? All right, we got a few more questions in here. This is a good one from Mark. So how does the panel feel about non-monetary comp for failures or loss? So the hypothesis behind this being, right, you learn actually a hell of a lot more from losing than you do from winning. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen companies either maybe celebrate losses or do anything different around losing out on an opportunity? And Matt, let's start with you on this one, and then Stan, Stan, go ahead, actually.
Well, I listened to a podcast from Matt, and I think it resonated really well with me. I like this analogy of he's this duck on a pond, and he looks calm. He looks, he looks like nothing, like a loss is no big deal, but underneath it's like, oh, I don't think I could swear, but oh crap, it's like he's moving 100 miles an hour underneath, right? You don't see the legs moving, but I think as leaders, we do need to be calm, because you know what, a loss is going to happen. You're not going to win every deal. But I think those are the moments where you learn the most. And so I don't know if I would say I'm celebrating a loss, because I don't, but I do think, what can we learn? Like, we're calm, we're having a discussion, and we're sharing that with the team. What did we learn so that we can apply that to the next deal and get better? Because it's really all about learning. Each of us at the respective companies that we're at different stages, whether we're a startup, from, we're 1 to 10 million, we're 10 to 50 million, we're 50 and beyond, or we're big, corporations. Every one of us that are in different cycles. And I think learning in either one of those stages matters, in being able to apply that across new deals to be able to get better as a team and share and be collaborative. It's really creating that culture of collaboration is really important, because if it's closed and you're not, again, I'm not saying we're celebrating a loss, but we're learning from a loss. And if reps don't feel comfortable being able to share, you're missing a huge opportunity. And one of the things that we did very early on is we set ground rules in terms of how we communicate about deals. And one of the big ground rules that we leveraged is, I don't know is a great answer. And it's being able to get better. So I think it's just creating that environment to be open and to know that, look, we want to win. We are winners. We want to get every deal possible across the finish line. We also know that we'll have losses and we're going to learn from those losses. But what did we get out of it? what do we learn and how can we improve? And I think that kind of culture will help in many ways, not celebrate a loss, but learn from a loss, which could turn into a celebration on the next deal.
Huge part on culture there, right? If the answer is, I don't know, and I know that if I answer that, I'm going to get blown out of the deal review. Like, oh, what the heck is wrong with you, Stan? Why didn't you ask that? Are you dumb? You're going to have a very hard time with that. I'll provide some perspective too on this.
If I can add just one more thing, Rich, to that wasn't a Stan and Matt discussion. That was a team discussion. It was our team saying, these are our ground rules. So we had buy-in from everyone. There was some influence, but I think just that kind of culture is what we're trying to establish. And it's been really good because we know that we're in certain situations earlier as a result of having that, okay, it's good to say no. It's good to say that we're losing or not losing, but we're behind. This is why, this is how we improve.
Right. And I think the other part on that too, there's a whole feedback loop between that and the product organization, the marketing organization that can happen. Like, oh, maybe that's actually not the right vertical for us to even talk to, right? It turns out oil and gas is a whole pain in the butt for us versus what our product offers today. Let's not spend any time on that right now. It opens up the ability to have those conversations versus hiding it. And I love close lost because I think oftentimes you get reps that hold on to deals. Oh no, just one more quarter, one more week, one more month, whatever it is. Having good rules of how you communicate and also when to close things out relieves some of that pressure, I think, in an organization, right? If it's like, no, you haven't heard from anybody in 6 months, it's time to close lost. Like it's time to shut it down there. This is probably going to be our last question. It's a pretty meaty one. John, thank you for asking this. And I'm going to paraphrase John's question here. And Matt, let's start with you on this. This is a question that's coming out. How do you evaluate the leadership of an organization, a team, and a sales culture when you're looking at very early stage opportunities? How do you actually inspect, if you're looking for a new opportunity, those different elements that we've been talking about here today?
Yeah, it's actually a tremendous question. So for me, when I am talking to companies and kind of looking at a new opportunity, as a revenue leader, it's from a CEO perspective, like I'm looking for a partner and I'm looking for someone that, I can build a company with, and that's going to have our backs, because even the best companies on the planet in the beginning, there's some rocky roads sometimes, right? It gets a little bumpy. So you want to make sure that you feel safe and you feel like the CEO's got your back through through good times and slow times. Like for example, with Spiff, I've never been through a Q3 here. So, could be a little soft depending on how soft it is. Like him and I are already talking about it. But I think, having that partnership is incredibly important. And, I think, figuring out a company's culture, it all comes from the top, right? And having conversations with that person and who are they as a person? Are they authentic? Do they lead with empathy? Does their style kind of jive with yours? It all starts there, and if you want to kind of verify culture, then I would, talk to others in the company. I'd talk to other executives, potentially some, individual contributors and figure out like, what is the real culture there? But 9 times out of 10, you can tell just by talking to the CEO, because that's where it all starts.
It's almost like they build the companies that they want to work at.
Crazy concept, right?
It's funny how that works. Well, gang, I hate to break it to you, we're almost at time here. As we start to wind down, Matt and Stan, both thank you so much. But before we wrap, I would love to get like one tweet length takeaway from each of you. So if I'm starting and I want to build a high performance sales culture, Stan, what's one thing that I can start doing that will help on that journey?
Top of mind for me is alignment with your executives on what the objectives are, and then creating the comp plan that drives the right attitude and the right behavior to get to the end game.
Great. Matt, one key takeaway here: creating a high performance sales culture. What can I start doing?
Ensure that your goals are correct, and making sure that your goals are achievable, not easy, but ensuring that everyone is aligned around that I think will drive a level of urgency and just, ownership in the sales team. I think just having that right is everything flows from there.
It's alignment, ownership, so many great concepts here that we discussed today. Matt and Stan, I know you're both incredibly busy. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and time with the Modern Sales Pros community today. On behalf of everyone who attended live, the folks watching on YouTube, and Taylor and the team behind the scenes, thank you all so much. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day, y'all. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.